The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Amelia Anderson's cracked lips as she crawled through the unforgiving Nevada desert. Her once beautiful blue dress now tattered and stained with dirt and blood. Her husband Charles had left her to die 3 days ago, driving away in their wagon after a heated argument about the gold he'd been hiding, taking all the water and leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the wedding ring he demanded she remove. "Water," she croaked, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that swept across the barren landscape. The year was 1878, and out here in the wild expanse of the Nevada Territory, a woman alone might as well already be dead. Amelia collapsed onto the burning sand, her strength finally giving out after miles of desperate wandering. As darkness began to creep into the edges of her vision, she thought she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats, but she was certain it was just her mind playing cruel tricks before death claimed her. Miles O'Connor pulled back on the reins of his chestnut stallion, Rusty, as he spotted something unusual against the desert floor, something that didn't belong among the cacti and tumbleweeds, something blue. "Whoa there," he said softly, squinting against the harsh sunlight. His weather-beaten face, tanned from years under the open sky, creased with concern as he realized what he was seeing. "Good Lord, that's a woman!" He dismounted quickly, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the ground, and rushed toward the still form lying face down in the sand. Gently, he turned her over, wincing at the sight of her sunburnt skin and cracked lips. Her pulse was faint, barely perceptible beneath his calloused fingers. "Madam, can you hear me?" Miles asked, already reaching for his canteen. When she didn't respond, he carefully lifted her head and trickled a few drops of water between her parched lips. "Easy now. Not too fast." Amelia's eyes fluttered open momentarily, revealing irises the color of a summer sky before they rolled back in her head. Miles knew she wouldn't survive much longer in this condition. Without hesitation, he gathered her limp body into his arms, surprised by how little she weighed, and lifted her onto his horse. "Hang on, madam," he murmured, climbing up behind her and cradling her against his chest to keep her from falling. "Lyndon's not too far. We'll get you fixed up." He urged Rusty forward, praying the woman would survive the journey to town. Lyndon, Nevada, was a small but growing settlement nestled between mountain ranges, built around a natural spring that had made it a welcome sight for travelers, and a convenient stop on the newly constructed railway line. Miles had a modest cabin on the outskirts, preferring solitude to the increasingly bustling Main Street with its saloons and general stores. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty yard. Miles carried Amelia inside and placed her gently on his bed, then set about trying to cool her fever and rehydrate her failing body. For 3 days, Miles barely slept, constantly monitoring Amelia's condition, spooning water and broth between her lips, and placing cool compresses on her forehead. He'd sent word to Doc Watson in town, but the physician was away delivering twins at her ranch 20 miles south. On the 4th morning, Amelia finally opened her eyes properly, panic flooding her features as she found herself in an unfamiliar room with a strange man at her bedside. "Where am I?" "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse but determined as she tried to sit up. "Easy there," Miles said, his deep voice gentle. "Name's Miles O'Connor. Found you half dead in the desert 4 days back. You're at my cabin outside Lyndon." He offered her a cup of water, which she eyed suspiciously before her thirst won out, and she accepted it. "Lyndon," she repeated slowly, trying to place the name. "Nevada," Miles nodded. "Yes, madam. May I ask your name?" She hesitated, as if weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she replied, "Amelia. Amelia Anderson." Well, Miss Anderson, she corrected quickly, twisting the empty space on her ring finger where her wedding band had been. Or I suppose it's Mrs. still, technically, but I'd rather not use that name anymore. Miles raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Miss Anderson, then. Mind telling me how you came to be alone in the desert without supplies? It's not the kind of place for a solitary stroll. Amelia's eyes hardened. My husband left me there to die. The bluntness of her statement took Miles aback. He'd encountered all manner of human cruelty in his 32 years, particularly during his time as a scout during the war. But abandoning a woman in the desert struck him as especially heinous. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said simply, not wanting to pry but also recognizing that he needed to know if there was danger. "Is he likely to come looking for you?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Only if he thinks I somehow survived and might tell someone about the gold he stole." She paused, looking suddenly wary. "I've said too much. Your secrets are safe with me," Miles assured her. "I'm not one to meddle in other folks' business. My concern is getting you well enough to decide what you want to do next." Amelia studied him, taking in his tall frame, broad shoulders, and the kind brown eyes that contrasted with his otherwise rugged appearance. His dark hair was a bit too long, curling at the collar of his faded blue shirt, and a short beard covered his jawline. He looked like every other cowboy and rancher in the West, yet something about the gentleness of his hands as he adjusted her blanket made her think he was different. "Thank you," she said finally, "for saving my life." Miles simply nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "You should rest more. I'll fix some real food. You need your strength back." As he turned to leave, Amelia called after him, "Mr. O'Connor, how do you make your living out here?" He paused at the door. "I break horses for the local ranches and guide hunting parties in the mountains sometimes. Nothing glamorous, but it keeps me fed and free." With that, he stepped outside, leaving Amelia to contemplate her rescuer and her uncertain future. Over the next week, Amelia's strength gradually returned under Miles' attentive care. He was gone during daylight hours, working with a particularly stubborn Mustang for the Wilson Ranch, but he always returned with fresh supplies and news from town. "Folks are starting to wonder who I'm hiding out here," he mentioned one evening as they shared a simple supper of venison stew. "Mrs. Crawford at the general store gave me a woman's nightgown when I bought fabric for bandages. Said you couldn't be comfortable in my old shirts." Amelia blushed slightly. She had indeed been wearing one of Miles' shirts since her dress was beyond repair. That was kind of her. "I'll have to thank her when I'm well enough to go into town." "And what then?" Miles asked, his tone casual though his eyes were watchful. "Do you have family you can go to?" Amelia's face fell. "No, my parents died in a typhoid outbreak when I was 16. I have an aunt in San Francisco, but we haven't spoken since I married Charles against her wishes. She warned me he was only after my family's property in Kansas." She shook her head ruefully. She was right, of course. Once he sold it all and gambled away the proceeds, he decided to try his luck in the gold fields. Miles listened intently, piecing together her story. "And the gold you mentioned, Charles always kept secrets," Amelia explained, absently stirring her stew. "But I discovered he'd been stealing gold from his employer at the mine. When I confronted him, he became enraged. We were traveling to California, where he said he had buyers for the stolen gold when our wagon broke down in the desert. After we argued, he struck me and left me there." Her hand unconsciously touched a fading bruise on her cheek. Miles' jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "And you'd been married how long?" 3 years, she replied. "Though it feels like a lifetime." They fell silent, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the small cabin. Finally, Miles spoke again. You're welcome to stay here until you decide what's next. It's not much, but it's safe." Amelia smiled gratefully, feeling for the first time in years that perhaps she had found a place where she could breathe freely. As the days passed, Amelia began helping around the cabin, initially with small tasks as her strength returned, then taking on more of the household duties. Miles protested at first, insisting she was still recovering, but Amelia was determined not to be a burden. "I've been dependent on others my whole life," she told him firmly. "First my parents, then Charles. It's time I learned to stand on my own." Miles respected her determination, and they fell into a comfortable routine. He taught her to build and maintain a fire, to identify edible plants in the area, and even basic self-defense skills her sheltered upbringing in Kansas City had never provided. "A woman alone in these parts needs to know how to protect herself," he explained as he showed her how to handle his revolver one afternoon. Amelia was a quick study, her natural intelligence having been suppressed during her marriage to Charles, who preferred her docile and unquestioning. With Miles, she found herself thinking independently, offering opinions, and even arguing occasionally, something that would have earned her a slap from her husband. "You've got spirit," Miles observed with a smile after a particularly passionate debate about whether the new railroad would ultimately benefit or destroy the character of western towns like Linden. "Most people around here just agree with whatever I say because they think I'm some kind of wilderness expert." "And aren't you?" Amelia teased, enjoying the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. "I know some things about surviving," he admitted, "but I'm no expert on progress or the future." 2 weeks after her rescue, Miles finally took Amelia into town, lending her his spare horse, a gentle mare named Daisy. Amelia had fashioned a simple dress from the fabric Miles had purchased, and though it lacked the fashionable details of her previous wardrobe, she felt a certain pride in having made it herself. Linden was smaller than she'd imagined, just a single main street with wooden buildings on either side, but it was bustling with activity. The railway station at the end of town was under construction, and workers called greetings to Miles as they rode past. "You seem to know everyone," Amelia remarked. "It's a small town," Miles replied. "Hard not to know folks when there's only one saloon and one church." They stopped first at the general store where Mrs. Crawford, a plump woman with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. "So this is your mysterious guest," she said, looking Amelia up and down with open curiosity. "I'm pleased to see you recovered, my dear." "Thanks to Mr. O'Connor and your generous contribution of the nightgown," Amelia replied with a smile. "Pshaw, it was nothing, Mrs. Crawford waved dismissively. "Now, what can I get for you folks today?" As Miles gathered supplies, Mrs. Crawford leaned closer to Amelia. "He's a good man, you know. Keeps to himself mostly, but always the first to help when someone's in trouble. Half the widows in town would give their eyeteeth for him to look at them the way he looks at you." Amelia felt herself blushing. "It's not like that. He saved my life, that's all." Mrs. Crawford gave her a knowing smile. "If you say so, dear." Their next stop was the doctor's office, where Doc Watson, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, examined Amelia thoroughly. "You've made a remarkable recovery," he pronounced. "Mr. O'Connor must have excellent nursing skills." "He was very attentive," Amelia acknowledged. "And what are your plans now, Miss Anderson?" she corrected. "And I'm not entirely sure yet. I need to find work, I suppose." Doc Watson exchanged a glance with Miles. "As it happens, I've been looking for someone to help organize my office and assist with patients. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and my filing system is a disaster. It wouldn't pay much, but there's a room above the office you could have." Amelia looked at Miles, who kept his expression carefully neutral. "It's a good offer," he said. "Doc's respected in town. It would be a respectable position." Something in his tone made her heart sink a little. Did he want her to leave his cabin? Had she overstayed her welcome? She turned back to Doc Watson. "That's very kind. May I think about it?" "Of course," the doctor agreed. "The offer stands whenever you're ready." Their final stop was the sheriff's office, where Miles insisted Amelia report what had happened with Charles. Sheriff Perkins, a gruff man with an impressive mustache, took detailed notes. "So your husband's name is Charles Anderson. He stole gold from the Golden Dream mine near Virginia City and abandoned you in the desert to die. That about cover it?" Amelia nodded, finding it harder than expected to revisit the trauma. Miles' steady presence beside her gave her courage. "I'll send telegrams to neighboring jurisdictions," Sheriff Perkins promised. "Though truth be told, there's a lot of desert between here and California. If he's smart, he's already sold the gold and changed his name." "I don't care about the gold," Amelia said firmly. "I just don't want him finding me." The sheriff nodded sympathetically. "I understand, madam. We'll keep an eye out, don't you worry." As they rode back to the cabin in the late afternoon sun, Amelia felt conflicted. The town had been welcoming, and Doc Watson's job offer represented security and respectability. Yet the thought of leaving Miles' cabin created an unexpected ache in her chest. "You're quiet," Miles observed as they approached his property. "Just thinking about Doc Watson's offer," Amelia admitted. "It's a good opportunity," Miles said, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "Yes," she agreed, searching for words to express her uncertainty. "But I've grown comfortable here. I'm not sure I'm ready to be alone again." Miles reined in his horse, turning to look at her directly. "You wouldn't have to leave right away. Not until you're fully recovered." "And if I said I already feel recovered?" Amelia challenged, holding his gaze. Something flickered in Miles' eyes, hope, perhaps, or fear. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. 3 men on horseback were coming fast down the trail toward them. Miles instinctively moved his horse closer to Amelia's, his hand hovering near his sidearm. As the riders drew nearer, he relaxed slightly. "It's just Sam Wilson and his boys," he told Amelia. "They own the largest ranch in the county." Sam Wilson, a burly man in his 50s with a shock of white hair, pulled up alongside them. "O'Connor, just the man I was looking for. That stallion you broke for us is working out fine, but we've got 6 more that need training before winter." "Glad to hear it, Mr. Wilson," Miles replied. "I can start on the others next week." Wilson's gaze shifted to Amelia, his eyebrows rising slightly. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "This is Miss Anderson," Miles said, his tone carrying a subtle warning that Amelia noted with interest. "She's recovering from an illness under Doc Watson's care." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Anderson," Wilson said with a tip of his hat. "Any friend of O'Connor's is welcome at the Wilson Ranch. In fact," he continued, turning back to Miles, "we're having a harvest dance this Saturday. You should both come. The whole county will be there." Miles looked uncomfortable. "I'm not much for dancing, Mr. Wilson." "Nonsense. A pretty lady like Miss Anderson deserves a night of music and fun." "You wouldn't deny her that, would you?" Miles glanced at Amelia, who couldn't hide her enthusiasm at the prospect. It had been so long since she'd enjoyed any social occasion. "We'd be delighted to attend," she said before Miles could refuse again. Wilson beamed. "Excellent. 8 o'clock Saturday. Don't be late." With that, he and his sons continued on toward town. Miles gave Amelia a reproachful look as they resumed their journey. "I really don't dance." "Then you can watch me dance," she replied lightly. "I haven't had any fun in years, Miles." Surely you can endure one evening of socializing, he sighed in resignation. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you about my dancing. As they approached the cabin, Amelia realized she'd called him by his first name for the first time. More surprisingly, he hadn't seemed to mind. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparation for the dance. Amelia, with Mrs. Crawford's help, altered a dress that had belonged to the shopkeeper's daughter, now married and living in Sacramento. The pale yellow fabric complemented Amelia's fair complexion and brought out the gold flecks in her blue eyes. Miles, meanwhile, reluctantly dug out his only suit from the bottom of his trunk, a relic from his brief stint as a salesman in St. Louis before the war. It was slightly outdated and a bit tight across his shoulders, but Amelia assured him he looked handsome after helping him adjust his tie. I feel like I'm being strangled, he grumbled, but his complaints died when he saw Amelia emerge from the small bedroom in her finished dress, her auburn hair arranged in soft curls around her face. You look. He started, then seemed at a loss for words. Amelia smiled, pleased by his reaction. Thank you. You clean up quite nicely yourself, Mr. O'Connor. The Wilson Ranch was ablaze with lanterns when they arrived, the large barn cleared of hay and decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons. A small band played lively tunes while couples danced and others mingled around tables laden with food and drink. Amelia felt a moment of trepidation as they entered. It had been so long since she'd been in such a large gathering, and never without Charles dictating her every move. But Miles' steady presence beside her bolstered her courage. Miss Anderson, Mr. O'Connor, Sam Wilson boomed, approaching them with a glass of punch in hand. So glad you could make it. Please help yourselves to refreshments. They were quickly drawn into conversations with various townspeople, all curious about the woman Miles O'Connor had rescued. Amelia found herself repeating a simplified version of her story, omitting the details about Charles' theft and abuse. It's like something from a novel, sighed Martha Jenkins, the young schoolteacher, being rescued by a handsome cowboy. Miles would hate to be called a cowboy, Amelia laughed. He considers himself a horse trainer and guide. Still, Martha insisted, it's terribly romantic. Before Amelia could protest that there was nothing romantic about their arrangement, the band struck up a waltz, and to her surprise, Miles appeared at her elbow. I believe I promised you a dance, he said, offering his hand. I thought you didn't dance, she teased, placing her hand in his. I said I wasn't much for dancing, not that I couldn't, he corrected, leading her onto the floor. My mother insisted all her sons learn properly. As Miles guided her through the waltz with unexpected grace, Amelia felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the spinning motion. His hand was warm and steady at her waist, and when their eyes met, she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. You're full of surprises, Mr. O'Connor, she said softly. A half smile curved his lips. As are you, Miss Anderson. They danced 3 more dances before taking a break for refreshments. As they stood near the punch bowl, a commotion at the entrance caught their attention. A man in expensive but trail-worn clothes was scanning the crowd with an intent expression. Amelia's glass slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, shattering on the floor. Charles, she whispered, all color draining from her face. Miles followed her gaze, instantly alert. Your husband, she nodded, already backing away. He's found me. How did he find me? Stay calm, Miles instructed quietly, positioning himself between Amelia and the entrance. Is there another way out? Side door behind the band, Sam Wilson answered, having overheard their exchange. Friend of yours? He asked, eyeing Charles with suspicion. Her husband, Miles explained tersely. The one who abandoned her in the desert. Wilson's expression darkened. Take her out the side, I'll delay him. Miles nodded gratefully and guided Amelia toward the exit, keeping to the edges of the crowd. They were nearly there when Charles's voice cut through the music. "Amelia, there you are, my dear." She froze, terror gripping her heart. Miles squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Keep walking," he murmured. "We're almost out." But Charles was pushing through the crowd toward them, his handsome face fixed in a charming smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Darling, I've been looking everywhere for you. When our wagon broke down and you wandered off, I feared the worst." Whispers rippled through the gathered townspeople, who had all heard Amelia's story of abandonment. Miles felt her trembling beside him and made a swift decision. "Mr. Anderson," he said loudly, stepping forward, "your wife has told us what really happened. You left her to die." Charles's smile faltered only momentarily. "There seems to be some misunderstanding. My wife has always had a flair for the dramatic. She must have become confused after being lost in the desert." He turned to Amelia, his voice hardening slightly despite the smile. "Come along, dear. We have much to discuss in private." "She's not going anywhere with you," Miles stated firmly. Charles's pleasant facade slipped further. "This is between me and my wife, stranger. Step aside. The name's Miles O'Connor and Miss Anderson is under my protection." "Miss Anderson?" Charles laughed incredulously. "She's Mrs. Anderson, my lawfully wedded wife, and I'll thank you to stop interfering in our marriage." Sheriff Perkins pushed through the onlookers, hand resting on his gun belt. "Everything all right here, Sheriff? I'm Charles Anderson. This man is attempting to prevent me from leaving with my own wife," Charles explained smoothly. "Your wife says you left her to die in the desert," the sheriff countered. Charles sighed dramatically. "As I was explaining, there was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Our wagon broke down, I went for help, and when I returned, Amelia was gone. I've been searching for her for weeks." "That's a lie," Amelia said, finding her voice at last. Her initial fear was giving way to anger. "You struck me and drove away with all our supplies after I confronted you about the stolen gold." Charles's expression darkened. "Now, Amelia, you know that's not true. You've always had an overactive imagination." "The telegram I received from the sheriff in Virginia City says different," Sheriff Perkins interjected. "They're very interested in talking to you about a significant quantity of missing gold from the Golden Dream mine." For the first time, Charles looked genuinely alarmed. His hand moved toward his jacket, but before he could draw the weapon concealed there, Miles lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The two men struggled briefly before Miles pinned Charles, and the sheriff quickly relieved him of his revolver. "Charles Anderson, you're under arrest for theft, attempted murder, and I suspect a whole lot more once we start digging," Sheriff Perkins announced, handcuffing the now cursing man. As the sheriff and his deputy led Charles away, he twisted to shout back at Amelia, "This isn't over. You're still my wife. You have nowhere to go." The barn fell silent as the doors closed behind them. Amelia stood trembling both from fear and relief until Miles gently touched her arm. "Are you all right?" he asked, his concerned eyes searching her face. She nodded shakily. "Yes, I never expected to see him again." "The sheriff will hold him until the authorities from Virginia City arrive," Miles assured her. "He won't hurt you again." Sam Wilson approached, his expression grave. "Miss Anderson, I apologize for the unpleasantness. Please know you're welcome in our community for as long as you wish to stay." Murmurs of agreement came from the surrounding townspeople, their faces showing sympathy rather than judgment. Amelia felt a rush of gratitude for these strangers who had so readily taken her side. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "I think we should head back," Miles suggested quietly. "It's been quite an evening." Amelia nodded, suddenly exhausted. As Miles helped her onto her horse, she couldn't help glancing toward the town jail where Charles was now imprisoned. Even though she knew he couldn't harm her at the moment, his words echoed in her mind. "You're still my wife." The ride back to Miles' cabin was silent, both lost in their thoughts. Only when they arrived and Miles helped her down from her horse did Amelia speak. "He's right, you know. I am still his wife. In the eyes of the law, I belong to him." Her voice trembled slightly. "Even if he goes to prison for the theft, he'll still have a claim on me." Miles led her inside and stoked the fire to ward off the autumn chill. "There are ways to end a marriage," he said carefully, "especially in cases of abandonment or cruelty. Divorce," Amelia's eyes widened, "but the scandal, I'd be ruined." "You'd be free," Miles countered gently. "And from what I've seen, the people of Linden judge character more than circumstance." Amelia sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed by the possibilities before her. "I don't know what to do. All my life decisions have been made for me, first by my parents, then by Charles. I've never truly chosen my own path." Miles knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Then perhaps it's time you did. What do you want, Amelia? Not what's expected or proper, but what would make you happy." She looked into his earnest brown eyes, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time, and realized with startling clarity exactly what would make her happy. But she wasn't ready to speak that truth aloud, not yet. "I want to stay in Linden," she said instead. "I want to accept Doc Watson's job offer and learn to be independent. I want to build a life that's mine." Miles smiled, though she thought she glimpsed a flicker of something like disappointment in his eyes. "Then that's what you'll do," he promised, "and I'll help however I can." True to his word, Miles helped Amelia move into the small room above Doc Watson's office the following week. Charles had been transferred to Virginia City to stand trial for theft, and Amelia had filed preliminary papers seeking to dissolve her marriage on grounds of abandonment and cruelty, a scandal that caused less commotion in Linden than she'd feared. Her work with Doc Watson proved satisfying. She had a natural affinity for organization, and quickly transformed his chaotic office into an efficient practice. The doctor also discovered she had a steady hand and calm demeanor during emergencies, and began teaching her basic medical skills. "You have a gift for healing," he told her after she successfully stitched a young boy's cut while the doctor was busy with another patient. "Have you ever considered formal training?" "Women can't become doctors," Amelia replied, though the idea intrigued her. "Times are changing," Doc Watson said thoughtfully. "There are women doctors in the East now, not many, but it's possible." It was another possibility to consider in her new life of choices, but whenever Amelia thought about her future, she found her mind returning to Miles. Though they saw each other frequently, he often came to town for supplies, or to check on her. She missed the easy companionship they'd shared in his cabin. Miles, for his part, seemed both proud of her growing independence and oddly distant. He was unfailingly kind and helpful, but something had changed between them since the night of the harvest dance. The warmth she'd glimpsed in his eyes when they'd waltzed seemed carefully guarded now. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Linden in snow and bringing a rush of injuries and illnesses that kept Amelia and Doc Watson busy. One particularly bitter night in December, as a blizzard howled outside, the doctor was called to deliver twins at a farm 5 miles away. "I'll have to go," he told Amelia, pulling on his heaviest coat. "Mrs. Fletcher is having a difficult time, and this is her first birth." "But the storm," Amelia protested, peering out at the swirling snow. "It's dangerous." "That's why I need you to stay here," Doc Watson replied firmly. "Someone might need medical attention while I'm gone. You know enough now to handle basic emergencies until I return." Reluctantly, Amelia agreed, and the doctor departed into the howling whiteness, leaving her alone in the office with a well-stocked medical cabinet and a roaring fire to keep the cold at bay. Shortly after midnight, as the storm reached its peak, urgent pounding on the door startled Amelia from a light doze. She hurried to open it, finding Sam Wilson's eldest son, Thomas, his face white with fear beneath the snow caking his hat and coat. "Miss Anderson." "It's Miles. There's been an accident. Pa sent me to fetch Doc Watson." Amelia's heart seemed to stop. "The doctor's away at a birth. What happened to Miles?" "He was helping us secure the barn against the storm when part of the roof collapsed. Beam fell on him. He's conscious, but in a bad way. Pa thinks his leg might be broken and there's a deep gash on his side." Without hesitation, Amelia began gathering supplies. "Help me pack these into your saddlebags," she instructed. "I'll come back with you." Thomas looked doubtful. "In this storm, it's 3 miles to the ranch." "Miles needs medical attention," Amelia said firmly, already pulling on her warmest clothes. "And I'm what's available." The journey to the Wilson Ranch was a nightmare of biting cold and disorientation, but Thomas knew the way even in whiteout conditions. By the time they arrived, Amelia's face was numb and her fingers stiff inside her gloves, but her mind was focused solely on Miles. They found him laid out on a cot in the Wilsons' living room, his face ashen with pain. Sam Wilson and his wife had done their best, cutting away his bloodied clothing and applying pressure to the wound on his side, but blood still seeped through the makeshift bandages. "Amelia," Miles murmured incredulously when he saw her. "You shouldn't be here. The storm." "Hush," she commanded, already removing her outer garments and washing her hands in the basin Mrs. Wilson provided. "Let me see what we're dealing with." The wound on Miles' side was deep, revealing a glimpse of rib where the beam had struck him, but it was the leg that concerned Amelia most. The break was compound, the bone protruding slightly through the skin just below his knee. "I need to set this before I can stitch the wound," she told Miles, meeting his eyes directly. "It's going to hurt terribly." He managed a weak smile. "I trust you." Those 3 words gave Amelia the courage she needed. With Thomas and Mr. Wilson holding Miles steady, she carefully manipulated the broken bone back into position, her ears deaf to Miles' muffled groans as she focused entirely on the task. Once satisfied with the alignment, she splinted the leg firmly and moved on to cleaning and stitching the gash in his side. By the time she'd finished, dawn was breaking, the storm had subsided, and Miles had passed out from a combination of pain and the whiskey they'd given him to dull it. Amelia sat beside him, monitoring his breathing and pulse, refusing all suggestions that she rest. "You love him, don't you?" Mrs. Wilson asked quietly as she brought Amelia a cup of coffee. Amelia didn't bother denying it. "Yes," she admitted, the truth she'd been avoiding for months finally spoken aloud. "But I don't know if he feels the same." Mrs. Wilson smiled knowingly. "My dear, that man hasn't taken his eyes off you since the harvest dance. Even unconscious, he turns toward your voice." When Miles finally woke properly, his first words were Amelia's name, his hand reaching for hers as if to confirm she was really there. "I thought I dreamed you," he murmured. "I'm here," she assured him, squeezing his fingers gently. "You're going to be fine, but you need to rest and let the bones heal properly." "At the ranch," Miles frowned. "I need to get back to my cabin, check on the horses." "Your horses are being cared for," Sam Wilson interjected from the doorway. "And you're not going anywhere for at least a week, O'Connor. Doctor's orders." He nodded respectfully to Amelia. "I'm not a doctor," she protested. "You saved my leg, maybe my life," Miles countered. "That's good enough for me." Over the next week, as Miles recovered at the Wilson Ranch, Amelia divided her time between caring for him and her duties at Doc Watson's office. The doctor, impressed by her handling of the emergency, began teaching her more advanced procedures and lending her his medical texts to study. "You have a real gift," he told her after examining Miles' healing leg. "It's set perfectly. Have you reconsidered medical training?" Amelia glanced at Miles, who was watching her with unmistakable pride. "I've been thinking about it," she admitted. "But there's so much uncertainty in my life right now." Indeed, uncertainty seemed to define her existence. Word had come that Charles's trial was proceeding in Virginia City, but he was attempting to contest the divorce proceedings despite the overwhelming evidence of his crimes. Her future, whether she would be free, whether she could pursue medical training, whether she might build a life in Linden, all hung in a precarious balance. The only certainty was her feelings for Miles, which grew stronger with each passing day. Yet still, he maintained a careful distance between them, never speaking of anything beyond friendship, despite the tenderness she sometimes caught in his gaze. By early January, Miles was well enough to return to his cabin, though still reliant on crutches to move around. Amelia found herself inventing reasons to visit him, bringing supplies or checking his healing wounds, unwilling to surrender the closeness they'd regained during his convalescence. On one such visit, as a light snow fell outside the cabin windows, she found him attempting to chop vegetables one-handed while balancing on his crutch. "What are you doing?" she demanded, taking the knife from his hand. "You'll cut yourself," Miles grimaced. "Trying to make soup. A man can't live on beans forever." "Sit down," she ordered, guiding him to a chair. "I'll finish this." As she efficiently prepared the vegetables and added them to the pot simmering on the stove, Miles watched her with a complex expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You've changed," he observed finally. Amelia glanced up, surprised. "Have I? The woman I found in the desert would never have ridden through a blizzard to set a broken leg or taken charge of a soup pot so decisively," he said with a small smile. "You found your strength." "I suppose I have," she agreed, stirring the soup thoughtfully. "Though I think it was always there, just waiting for the right circumstances. And the right people to believe in you," Miles added quietly. Amelia set down the spoon and turned to face him fully. "Why do you do that?" she asked suddenly. Miles blinked, confused. "Do what?" "Say things that make me think you care for me, then pull away as if you've said too much." A flush crept up Miles' neck. "Amelia, no," she interrupted, her newfound courage driving her forward. "I need to know, Miles. That night at the dance before Charles arrived, I felt something between us. Was I wrong?" Miles looked down at his hands. "You weren't wrong," he admitted softly, "but you're still married, Amelia. And even if the divorce is granted, you deserve better than a simple horse trainer with a broken leg and a cabin that leaks when it rains." Amelia crossed the room to kneel before him, taking his calloused hands in hers. "Miles O'Connor, you saved my life. Not just by finding me in the desert, but by showing me I could be strong and independent. You never tried to control me or make decisions for me. Do you know how rare that is?" Miles met her gaze, his eyes revealing the depth of feeling he'd been concealing. "I couldn't bear to cage something as beautiful as your spirit," he said simply. "And that," Amelia whispered, "is why I love you." The words hung in the air between them, a truth finally spoken aloud. For a moment, Miles seemed frozen, as if unable to believe what he'd heard. Then slowly, he raised a hand to cup her cheek. "I've loved you since you argued with me about whether coyotes could be domesticated," he confessed, a smile spreading across his face. "You were so fierce, even though you were still weak from the desert." Amelia laughed, leaning into his touch. "They can't be, you know." "So you keep saying," Miles murmured, and then he was kissing her, his lips gentle yet insistent against hers, his hand sliding into her hair to draw her closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Amelia rested her forehead against his. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We wait for your divorce to be finalized," Miles replied firmly. "Do things properly, and then, if you'll have me, I'd like to court you officially." "Court me?" Amelia teased. "I'm practically living in your cabin half the time as it is." "All the more reason to respect your reputation," Miles insisted. "I want to do right by you, Amelia. No secrets, no rushing, no pressure." She kissed him again, marveling at how different it felt to be with a man who respected her choices. "I suppose I can be patient a little longer." Their patience was tested over the following months, as Charles's legal maneuvers delayed the divorce proceedings. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the desert around Linden and new opportunities for Amelia, who had become Doc Watson's official assistant and was corresponding with a women's medical college in Philadelphia about possible admission. Miles' leg healed completely, allowing him to return to his work with horses, though he now supplemented his income by offering riding lessons to the town's children. The lessons were Amelia's suggestion after she noticed how naturally he connected with the young boy who needed stitches in Doc Watson's office. "You're good with children," she'd observed. "Patient and kind." Miles had seemed pleased by the observation. "I've always thought I'd like to have a family someday. Never seemed possible as a solitary horse trainer." "And now?" Amelia had asked, her heart quickening. His smile had been answer enough. "Now I have hope." Their courtship, though unofficial until the divorce was finalized, was the talk of Linden. Mrs. Crawford kept them supplied with pies and knowing winks, while Doc Watson began subtly suggesting that his practice might need a younger doctor to take over eventually, perhaps a husband and wife team of medical professionals. It was early summer when the telegram finally arrived from Virginia City. Amelia was organizing patient records when Doc Watson handed her the yellow paper, his eyes twinkling. "Special delivery for you, my dear." With trembling fingers, Amelia unfolded the telegram and read the brief message. "Divorce granted. Stop. Charles Anderson sentenced 15 years hard labor. Stop. Congratulations on your freedom. Stop. Sheriff Perkins." A cry of joy escaped her lips as the implications sank in. She was free, truly free for the first time in her adult life. Free to pursue medical training, free to build the life she wanted in Linden, and free to love Miles openly. She ran all the way to the livery stable where Miles was working with a new Mustang, waving the telegram like a victory flag. When he saw her coming, he immediately released the horse into its stall and caught her as she flung herself into his arms. "It's done," she gasped, pressing the telegram into his hand. "I'm free, Miles. The divorce is final." He read the message quickly, his face splitting into a grin. 15 years, he noted with satisfaction. "That should give us plenty of time to build our life." "Our life," Amelia repeated, her heart soaring at the implication. Miles set her down carefully and, to her astonishment, lowered himself to one knee despite the curious onlookers gathering at the stable door. "Amelia Anderson, or I suppose it's just Amelia Adams now," he began, taking her hand in his. "From the moment I found you in that desert, something in me recognized something in you. I didn't know then that it was love, but I know it now with absolute certainty. You are the strongest, most determined, most compassionate woman I've ever known. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, not as your protector or provider, but as your partner in whatever path you choose." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes as she gazed down at this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "Are you asking me to marry you, Miles O'Connor?" "I am," he confirmed, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Will you?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. The gathered townspeople erupted in cheers as Miles rose to his feet and sealed their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love, respect, and partnership. They were married in Linden's small church 2 weeks later, with the entire town in attendance. Doc Watson gave Amelia away, and Mrs. Crawford wept loudly through the entire ceremony. Even Sheriff Perkins was seen dabbing at his eyes when the couple exchanged the simple gold bands Miles had purchased from a jeweler in Carson City. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher announced. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. O'Connor." As Miles took her in his arms, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The desert that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her a new one, a life built on her own strength and the love of a good man who valued her independence as much as her affection. "Are you happy, Mrs. O'Connor?" Miles whispered against her lips. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. Their reception at the Wilson Ranch was a joyful affair, with dancing and feasting that lasted well into the night. As Miles led Amelia in another waltz, much like the one they'd shared at the harvest dance, Sam Wilson approached with a surprising announcement. "Wedding present from Mrs. Wilson and me," he said, handing Miles an envelope. "Deed to 50 acres adjoining your property and enough lumber to build a proper house. Can't have a doctor living in that tiny cabin of yours." Amelia's eyes widened. "But I'm not a doctor yet." "You will be," Wilson interrupted confidently. "Doc Watson's already arranging for you to apprentice officially while studying by correspondence with that college back east. No need to leave Linden for your education." Miles shook Wilson's hand gratefully. "This is incredibly generous." "Consider it payment for all the horses you'll be training for us in the coming years," Wilson replied with a wink. "And perhaps medical care for the grandchildren Mrs. Wilson keeps reminding me are overdue from our sons." Later that night, as Miles carried Amelia across the threshold of his cabin, their cabin, now she felt a profound sense of having come full circle. This place that had first represented her rescue now symbolized the beginning of their life together. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Connor," Miles said, setting her gently on her feet. "It's perfect," she replied, looking around at the simple cabin that already held so many memories. "Though I won't object to that larger house when the time comes." Miles pulled her into his arms. "We'll build it together," he promised. "Just as we'll build our life together one day at a time." And so they did. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys as Amelia completed her medical training and eventually joined Doc Watson as a full partner in his practice, becoming one of the few female physicians in the Nevada territory. Miles expanded his horse training business and started a small breeding program that produced some of the finest horses in the region. Their first child, a son they named James, arrived 2 years after their marriage, followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, 18 months later. The larger house on the Wilson land was completed just in time for the birth of their third child, another boy they called Thomas, after the young man who had guided Amelia through the blizzard to save Miles' life. Each summer, on the anniversary of the day Miles had found Amelia in the desert, they would ride out together to watch the sunset over the harsh landscape that had nearly claimed her life, but had instead given them both a second chance. "You ever regret it?" Miles asked on one such anniversary as they sat side by side on a rocky outcrop, their horses grazing nearby. "The medical college in Philadelphia offered you a full scholarship. You could have studied there in person, perhaps had a practice in a big city." Amelia leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as the setting sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "Not for a single moment," she assured him. "Everything I want is right here, my practice, our children, this wild, beautiful country." She turned to look up at him, her blue eyes filled with the same love that had only deepened over their years together. "And you, Miles O'Connor, always you." As darkness fell over the desert and the first stars appeared in the vast Nevada sky, Miles drew his wife closer, marveling at how a moment of compassion for a stranger had led to a lifetime of love. "We should head back," Amelia said eventually. "Mrs. Crawford is watching the children, and you know how she spoils them with sweets." Miles laughed, helping her to her feet. "Let her spoil them. Tonight's special." As they rode home through the moonlit desert, Amelia thought about the young woman she had once been, afraid and dependent, her spirit nearly broken by a man who saw her only as a possession. That woman could never have imagined the life she now lived, the strength she had found, or the love she shared with a man who cherished her independence as much as her heart. The lights of their home appeared in the distance, a beacon of warmth against the desert night. Inside waited their children, their future, and all the dreams they continued to build together. Amelia spurred her horse forward, eager to return to the life that had begun the day Miles O'Connor found her dying in the desert, and with kindness and respect brought her back to life. And as they approached their home, with its lamp-lit windows promising warmth and family, Miles reached across to take her hand, just as he had reached out to save her that fateful day years ago. Their fingers intertwined, a perfect partnership forged in the harshest of circumstances and tempered by time into something unbreakable. "Race you home," Amelia challenged with the playful spirit that had flourished under his love. Miles grinned, the years falling away from his face. "You're on, Mrs. O'Connor." Their laughter echoed across the desert as they galloped toward their future, side by side, the way they had chosen to face everything together.